Good morning, creative and crafty people. I hope you all are doing well today. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create this fun and gorgeous Jasper copper wire bracelet. The bracelet I'm going to make fits a size 6 to a 6.5 wrist, so if you want to make one that is larger, you may need to have some longer pieces of wire and extra beads. I've included how much extra you'll need in the description of this video. So come along and join me as I create this bracelet. To get started, we're going to need some 18 gauge wire, 2 pieces cut at 12 inches or 31 centimeters in length. We're going to need some 26 gauge wire cut at 20 inches or 51 centimeters in length, folded in half. We'll need a pair of looping pliers, a pair of chain nose pliers, a pair of bent chain nose pliers, a pair of flush cutters. We'll need 8 6mm Red Jasper beads, and you'll need 16 4mm Red Jasper beads. This concludes the materials you'll need for this bracelet unless you'd like yours a longer length. For adjusted amounts for a longer bracelet, check out the instructions in my description below. Now let's get started on this project. Now I'm going to take my 18 gauge wire and my looping pliers, and I'm going to grab this wire at about center, and I'm going to use the 7mm mandrel on my looping pliers, and I'm going to create a loop at the midpoint of these two 18 gauge wires at the same time. So I'm going to wrap that up and around, and then I'm going to cross my wires back over the top of each other here until I make a pretty wide V here, like so. And then I'm going to pull that off of the looping pliers, and here you can see I've made a loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset these wires. So I'm going to kind of make it look like it's a double exposed line, and have the wires that are below the loop line up side by side with each other. You see how those are lined up there. And then I'm going to leave that like that and set that to the side. And now I'm going to grab my 26 gauge wire that I've already folded in half, not smash down fold, but just a nice gentle fold there at the end. And I'm going to place one of the ends of that wire through my loop and then pull that all the way down, and I am going to wrap around the base of the original loop that I made with the 18 gauge wire. So I'm going to take one of the ends of that 26 gauge wire and put it through the loop and make a single wrap around, and then I'm going to do the same with the other tail end, putting it back through the loop the opposite direction and pulling that down. And so this has made 3 wraps around that loop. That just kind of secures that end, and it also has the end of that 26 gauge wire to hold on to something. So there you can see how nice and tidy that is. And now we're going to straighten those mid wires up, and we're going to use this thinner wire to thread the beads on. Now, grabbing one of my 4mm beads, I'm going to grab both of these 26 gauge wires together, and we're going to thread both of those wires into that single hole of this 4mm Jasper bead, like so. And then we're going to push that all the way to the end until it touches that 18 gauge wire. And now I'm going to grab one of my 6mm beads and do the same thing. We're just going to thread it on both wires, like so, and then again a 4mm bead. Pop that on there and thread it down to the bottom. Now we need to make sure those beads are nice and snug up against that 18 gauge wire. So I'm going to take both of these 26 gauge wire and just kind of pull a little bit and push those beads down at the same time. So that way we get a nice secure fit. And then once they're in place, I'm going to take one of those wires and pull it to the front and pull the other wire toward the back. And that will just kind of lock those beads in so they're not floating around on that wire. It makes it very frustrating trying to get this next part done if they're not staying in place. Now we're going to take the rightmost pair of 18 gauge wires and curve that wire around into a semi-oval shape, having that wire cross over the 26 gauge wire that's in the back, leaving the other toward the front. And then we're going to grab the other pair of 18 gauge wires and pull that over the top of the right side. And you're going to try to want to make that as even as possible to kind of match the other side. We're kind of mirroring that. And we're going to make a little pea pod here with little peas. The beads are the peas and the pod is the 18 gauge wires. And then we're going to pull those wires back over to each side, and then this 26 gauge wire that was in the front, we're going to pull that over the top of where those wires intersect, the 18 gauge wires intersect. So there you can see I've got the bottom one underneath and the top one on top. So I'm going to take the one that's on top and wrap it around where those wires intersect and create my first wrap, just like we did at the top, only we're doing it now at this section. So now we're going to take the other 26 gauge wire and wrap it down through the frame and bring it back out underneath. Pull that through, and that creates the other wrap, and we've got a total of 3 wraps there, and you'll see that when we get up close here. There are 3 wires coming across the top. And that just secures all that in there together. And now we're going to do it again. So grabbing our 26 gauge wire and a 4mm bead, we're going to put that bead right onto those wires and thread it down to meet up with my 18 gauge wire. Now grabbing a 6mm bead, doing the same thing, threading it on both those 26 gauge wires. Like so. Grab the 4mm bead, thread it on there. And there you can see we've got them all on there. We're going to make sure those are seated up nicely against the 18 gauge wire. And then separate the wires so we have one to the front and one to the back once they're all seated where we want them. And there I'm going to bend that one forward and the other back. Like so. And now grabbing the 2 wires on the right. You always want to start on the right side. If you started on the right side, if you started on the left, you always want to start on the left. That way it's uniform and it comes out the same all the way throughout. So here I'm doing that semi-oval, going up over the top of the beads, and then bringing the left side over the top of the right side. Like so. And there we've created our second pea pod. You just kind of want to take your time, do any adjustments to try to get it to look all the same, and your pod's the same size as you're going along. And now again, we're going to take that 26 gauge wire and make sure one is on top and one is on bottom of where those 18 gauge wires intersect. And then bringing the top wire around under the bottom of the frame up through the top to create a wrap around those intersected wires. And we're going to bring that back to the back and center that wire on there, and then we're going to grab the back wire and thread it down through the frame, back behind, and then bring that back up. And then again, making sure you got one wire over the top of the intersected 18 gauge wire and one wire behind, like so. And you can see those 3 wires that go across there. Just brings it nice and tight. And now we're going to rinse and repeat. Grabbing another 4mm bead, we're going to thread this on the 26 gauge wires together, and then placing it all the way up against that 18 gauge wire frame. We're going to grab our 6mm bead, thread it onto both those 26 gauge wires, and then grab one more 4mm bead, thread that onto both 26 gauge wires, and there they are. And then we're going to separate those wires, one to the front, one to the back, just to lock those beads into place. Again, we're going to grab the 2 wires on the right, form that semi-oval shape. Then grabbing the 2 wires on the left, we're going to mirror the right side, crossing it over the top of the right side of the wires. Then we're going to take our 26 gauge wire and thread it through the frame, wrapping the intersected wires. Once that is complete, you will have 3 pea pods, and through the magic of video editing, I'm going to speed that process up. There's 4 of the pea pods, then 6, and for me, the completed amount I needed was 8 pea pods, which measures about 6 1/4 inches, as you can see here, not including the clasp. So now I'm going to take both of those 26 gauge wires and cross them back over the frame one last time there. And then we're going to take this right side and bend that wire straight up. Those 2 wires, we're going to bend them straight up. Now grabbing the remaining 18 gauge wire, we're going to wrap that over the top of the 18 gauge wire that is coming straight up out of the piece. I'm going to use those chain nose pliers to help us to snug that wire as tight as possible around those 2 wires without making them cross over each other. If you wrap it too tightly, those 2 wires will cross over each other, and we don't want to do that. We just want to wrap it nice and snug. Then we're going to wrap it over another half a time there. And then we're going to grab that 26 gauge wire and start wrapping it around in between the other wires that we've wrapped around. So what that does is just kind of hide those wires. They kind of sneak inside of the little creases of those wires. And you're going to continue to wrap them around until both wires come out on the top, right up onto the 2 18 gauge wires that are side by side there. And then we're going to cut those wires or snip those wires halfway across those 2 wires coming out of the top of the piece. So we can kind of push those wraps down and then burnish them onto the back of that piece like so. Now with these other 18 gauge wires, we're going to go ahead and finish that second wrap and wrap them around to the back, covering over the top of the 26 gauge wire. That just hides all of that nice and tidy. And now we're going to cut these two 18 gauge wire wraps right at the center of the two 18 gauge wires coming out of the top of our piece. And then with our chain nose pliers, we are going to burnish those wires down after we snug those wraps up. There we go. I'm just going to do any little adjustments we need to make this look nice and neat and tidy, like so. And now we're going to make our clasp. So to make our clasp, we're going to bend these two top wires toward the back of our piece, the back of the bracelet, like so. And then grabbing the looping pliers, we're going to make a loop around the 5mm barrel. So here you can see I'm wrapping it around toward the front of the bracelet, like so. And then we're going to pull the looping pliers out. The tail ends of those wires are just coming right over the top of the bracelet. And then my flush cutters, I'm going to cut the tail end of this wire down so that the end of that clasp comes over the wraps just a little bit. And then with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to make a tiny little bend here at the end, like so. Now it's time to shape our bracelet. If you have a bracelet mandrel, you can use that. I just like to hand shape my bracelets. To me, it's just a lot easier to do. Some people have a little rounder wrists and you can make the bracelet more round. If you have more of an oval shaped wrist, you can make them more oval. I tend to like to make my bracelets more oval shaped. It just depends on what your client wants or what you like. So I'm just taking my time, getting it to look nice and even on both sides. And then when I'm finished, that clasp just pops right in there. For my loop, I use the 7mm mandrel, and then for the clasp, I use the 5mm mandrel to ensure that they were the correct size to fit into each other like that. So here I am trying it on for you, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to clasp that bracelet together. And look how gorgeous this turned out. I think it's just beautiful. And then it just pops right out like so and comes right off. Again, look how easy that is to get on and then off. So there is the completed project, y'all. What did you guys think of this? How would you do your bracelet? Would you use the same beads? Would you use different ones? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below and I will get back to you as I can to answer any questions you might have. I sure do appreciate all of the comments and the likes. Thank you so much for all of the support you all have given for this channel. I sure do appreciate you guys. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. It helps YouTube to push these videos out to other creators such as yourself. Again, thank you guys, and we'll see you all next Thursday.